over the past 10 to 15 years, Bitcoin and the crypto market have legitimized themselves as an asset class in the financial sector looking forward in the world economy, okay? Believe it or not, a lot of people around the world and a lot of people in the US are struggling financially, and Bitcoin is a great solution to a lot of their problems, okay? A lot of their financial problems, okay? But with that being said, still less than 10% of people in the world own cryptocurrency or own Bitcoin. Although it solves a good problem, less than 10% of people in the world own crypto and Bitcoin. And I believe that if more people understood how Bitcoin, the problem that Bitcoin solves in the world economy, then I think more people would own Bitcoin. And I think people would actually, believe it or not, be less stressed, even though most people think that Bitcoin is a high risk, stressful asset. I believe that if people understood the problems that Bitcoin solved, then they would actually be less stressed by owning Bitcoin, okay? And today we're gonna be talking about exactly that. We're gonna talk about Bitcoin's place in a future where the economies are evolving and the future in the world economy and what Bitcoin's place is in that, okay? We're gonna talk about that, but before I do, I need to let you guys know that nothing in this video is financial advice. I'm not your financial advisor. I'm not your financial counselor. What you decide to do with your money is up to you, and you need to take responsibility for your buys and your sells, okay? So let's get into the video and let's talk about this, all right? Okay, so let's identify the problem, right? What's the problem in the economy that, why do I keep talking about Bitcoin, right? Why do I keep talking about Bitcoin? What is so important? What's so great about Bitcoin, right? What problem does it solve? And in order for me to answer what problem it solves, you guys, is first I need to identify the problem, right? We need to identify what the problem is before we can understand what problem Bitcoin solves, okay? So the first thing that we need to talk about is that, and the first thing that we need to come to terms with is that governments around the world are printing their currencies, all right? All of them, right? All of them. So the first thing that we need to understand about governments, most governments, I would say 99% of governments in general, is that these governments are not profitable operations, okay? They're not profitable operations. The vast majority of governments operate at a deficit, okay? Now, when something operates at a deficit, what that means is that they either have to print more currency because they're not producing value, or they need to default, okay? And so when in a perfect world, what happens is that a government produces goods and services through either taxes or production, and then they can use that surplus to buy assets or help their own people. The problem is that with the governments now, the governments don't profit. They're not a profitable operation. So what they do is they take money from people, okay? And then what they do is they then spend that money, and then if they need excess, if they need to spend more money, then they print money off the printer. They borrow money. Who do they borrow the money from? They borrow money from the Fed, and then the Fed increases M2, the M2 money supply, which leads to inflation. And then because there's more currency units around the world, people bid up prices increase, and then everybody can afford less, and everybody's purchasing power goes down, okay? So that's the problem with that. That's the first problem, is that the government currencies are not backed by anything, and therefore the governments can just print them infinitely. And because the government's always spending more money and they don't operate on a profit or a surplus, they operate on a deficit, they're going to continue to print money, and they're going to continue to live in debt. And now it's to the point where if the governments don't refinance all their debt and they don't continue this debt loop, then the governments are going to default, okay? And the U.S. government is not going to default on their debt. So what they're going to do is they're going to keep printing money, okay? So that's number one, is that the governments around the world, specifically in the U.S., for most of you guys are U.S. based, all right? They print money, they print their currencies around the world, okay? And they're not going to stop doing it, okay? Which leads to a loss of purchasing power, and that's the problem, okay? Now, so how would you solve this problem, okay? How would you solve this problem? Well, the way that you would solve this problem is that you would find something that you can't print and that the governments don't control, right? So there are a few options to that. There's gold, there's silver, or precious metals, I should say. All right, gold being the most valuable precious metal, right? Or you have Bitcoin, or a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin that can be used. Something that a government doesn't control, and something that has a scarcity aspect of it, okay? Now, Bitcoin, I've talked about this before in the past. Bitcoin solves all these problems. Bitcoin is 21 million coins. Bitcoin is light, which means that you could send it very, very quickly with very little friction. Unlike gold, it's not heavy. Gold is, all right? And there's only 21 million, so the governments can't print it, okay? And the governments don't control it. I know there's this narrative out there saying that the governments are going to take over Bitcoin. All right, no, that's not going to happen, okay? That's not going to happen. The governments cannot take over Bitcoin. That's not how that works, all right? But they can try, but I don't think it's going to work too well, okay? But who knows? But anyway, Bitcoin, because of the scarcity aspect that it has, it counteracts the government's printing currency. Now, do I think that Bitcoin is going to take over the world? Do I think it's going to take over the dollar? Do I think the dollar is going to necessarily go away? No. Okay, I don't. I'm not one of those people who believe that Bitcoin is going to be a tool that's used to overthrow the government. All right, I don't believe that. Okay, if it happens, then fair enough. But I don't believe that that's a thing. I see Bitcoin, I see cryptocurrency as just an alternative form of money that people can choose to use. And if you choose to use it, then you're gonna gain the benefits of increasing your purchasing power and sovereignty. Okay, if you choose to use Bitcoin, so you work for dollars. Dollars aren't going away. You work for dollars, and then you take some of those dollars, whatever you can afford, and you put it into an asset such as Bitcoin, which is sovereign money. And then that sovereign money increases your purchasing power, and increases your sovereignty, because you're not reliant on as many third parties in order to use your money and keep your money. Okay, so that's that. Okay, the positions of Bitcoin. All right, so let's talk about what Bitcoin is, and let's talk about some analogies, okay? So Bitcoin is digital gold, okay? Bitcoin made a decision in 2017, 2018, we don't have to get into the details, that it's a store of value, okay? It's a store of value. A lot of arguments that you hear people make is that, oh, well, you don't use Bitcoin to, transact, or it's not, a good currency or anything, which is true, okay? Money comes in two forms, you guys. Money comes in payments and store of value. Bitcoin's decided to be the store of value, which is actually a good thing, okay? It's actually a good thing for the asset, because if you look at the size or the market cap of all the payment processors, MasterCard, Visa, etc., PayPal, and then you combine all of them together, and then you compare that with the blue chip store value asset like gold has a bigger market cap than all the payments combined, okay? So it's not a bad thing that I'm saying that Bitcoin's not used for payments outside of Lightning Network, okay? But it is digital gold, okay? It is digital gold. It's a digital store of value that maintains your purchasing power and your sovereignty. I've already said that, okay? So that's what Bitcoin is. That's where it's placed at. And that's the placement that it decided to have, and I think it's a good placement to have. Okay, it's a very good problem to solve. Okay, it's sovereign money, like I said before. So you could send it across the world, nobody's permission, or no single central party's permission, right? No friction, right? That's the other thing about Bitcoin, is that if you need to move your money, if you need to send your money to somebody, if you run your own node, if you run your own Bitcoin node, then nobody can take that from you, okay? The other thing too, guys, is that a lot of people don't realize that we're still very early in Bitcoin, guys. We're still very early in the cryptocurrency market. Okay, there's something in finance called the adoption curve. Okay, there's something in finance called the adoption curve. Bitcoin is still in its adoption curve, you guys. All right, think about 7-8 years ago when Wall Street, the same people that are buying Bitcoin like it's no tomorrow now, think about what they were doing 7-8 years ago. They were laughing at Bitcoiners. They were laughing at crypto. They were laughing. They were saying that it's fool's gold, or it's a Ponzi scheme, or they were laughing at calling all the Bitcoiners a bunch of nerds, or whatever the case may be. Look at them now, right? They're all buying Bitcoin because they realize that this asset's not going away. It solves a big problem, and you can't dismiss it anymore, right? You can't dismiss Bitcoin anymore. And Bitcoin is still in its adoption curve. And for those of you guys who don't know what an adoption curve is it's basically where there's steady growth, and then over time it gets adopted by the masses. And right now we're to the point where Wall Street and the bigger financial parties are now getting involved, which means that we're still very, very close. All right, the masses, the people, the majority of people have still don't own Bitcoin or still don't own crypto. Okay, it's still very, very new. Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, believe it or not, to where it was used publicly, it's only 15, 16 years old, you guys. It's not that old. Okay, this is a brand new asset class. If you compare that to gold, people have been trading gold for thousands of years. Okay, so it's a new asset class. It's brand new, and not a lot of people understand it yet, which is where the opportunity is, because you want to get something before it hits its adoption curve. Okay, governments and Wall Street are now doing as much as they can to accumulate a massive amount of Bitcoin. They're all creating Bitcoin strategic reserves. They're creating ETFs. They're trying to pass regulation to allow them to inject stablecoin liquidity into the crypto market. All right, it's very powerful. Okay, it's very, very powerful to understand that it's in its adoption curve. Okay, so what's the solution? Okay, what's the solution? Well, the solution is pretty simple, especially if you look at a Bitcoin versus a dollar chart. Okay, if you look at a Bitcoin versus a dollar chart, it's pretty obvious that anybody who doesn't like Bitcoin or doesn't want to accept the results that Bitcoin's produced, if you compare it to the US dollar, Bitcoin's kicked the living shit out of the US dollar. Okay, so this whole idea that Bitcoin's volatile and all this stuff, which is true. I mean, it is volatile because it's new. Whenever an asset is in its adoption curve, it's going to be volatile because people don't understand the asset, and therefore people are going to, the way that they price assets at different times, it's not going to be as clear. So it's going to be up and down, up and down, up and down based on the broader macro environment, right? So, but if you look at the price, if you zoom all the way out from Bitcoin's beginning to now, Bitcoin has absolutely destroyed the dollar more than any other asset class has ever seen. Okay, and that's just a fact, and you can't argue. There's no argument. All right, Bitcoin at the end of the day has maintained your purchasing power. People have gotten very wealthy off of Bitcoin, okay, and cryptocurrency. So the solution is pretty simple, right? Look at the chart and then get exposure to Bitcoin. All right, get exposure to Bitcoin. Depending on what your situation is, if you want to be an offensive investor and use Bitcoin and crypto as a tool to gain wealth, you can do that. It is possible. You can do it, especially if you focus and you lock into the crypto market and you specialize over a few years. You can make a good amount of money. Okay. You have to go, but the thing is that if you want to do that, you need to go all in, and you need to get committed, and you need to go grab some of the money and position your portfolio accordingly. Okay. From a defensive point of view, obviously some of you guys that watch my videos, I know, are older. You're working professionals. You have kids, you have a wife, you have family, you have responsibilities that you need to attend to, which I totally understand. For you, it would be, depending on your conviction level, depending on how comfortable you are, your risk tolerance, and what you can afford, 5 to 10, 15% into cryptocurrency is totally fine. And I think that that part of your investing portfolio can serve as a way to outperform the rest of the market, or outperform the rest of your portfolio, I should say, excuse me. And I think that could be a good use for you. I understand when you're defensive, you want to maintain your wealth. You don't want to take on too much risk. Maybe you're not as convicted in the crypto market as someone like me, and that's totally fine, okay? But the message that I want to send you guys in this video is that a lot of people think that crypto is risky, that Bitcoin is risky, and that Bitcoin's volatile, or it's too volatile, or you know, you should only put a little bit in, or whatever the case may be. And maybe for you that's true, but I want to make it very clear that in the world economy now, in the way that the world economy is changing, and all this debt is getting refinanced, and all this currency is being printed, and M2 is going up, and people are losing their purchasing power. I'm telling you right now, it's more risky, actually, if you understand the way economics works. It's more risky to own no crypto than it is to own crypto. Okay? I'm going to repeat that. It's more risky to not own any Bitcoin and not own crypto than to own Bitcoin and crypto. Specifically Bitcoin. This is a Bitcoin video, right? It's more risky to not own Bitcoin than it is to own Bitcoin. And this is what I think a lot of people need to grasp mentally, okay? If we go through a debt crisis, which I don't know if that's going to be happening anytime soon, it's certainly on the horizon. There's 38 trillion. You know, the M2 is past it. Like, we're past the debt ceiling right now. Things are crazy. Okay, the governments are just doing whatever they want. But if we have a dollar crisis, if we have a bond crisis, you guys, the people who don't have Bitcoin are going to be in deep trouble. Okay, because the dollars at that point it's basically going to have essentially a death spiral. Okay, and you don't want to be in that position. So owning just a little bit of exposure to crypto, a little bit of exposure to Bitcoin specifically, okay, is going to give you massive amounts of you know, peace of mind. Okay, believe it or not, you guys, people who own Bitcoin, a lot of people who own a decent amount of Bitcoin, they have peace of mind, because they know that if the governments screw up their currencies, like, you know, Venezuela did, or you know, all these other some of these Latin American countries, Germany prints a lot of money, all these countries that have printed their currency to oblivion and destroyed their own people's purchasing power. You know, had those people owned Bitcoin, had those people owned some sort of store of value, some sort of way to store their value in a more productive way, then they wouldn't have run into that problem, and they wouldn't have gotten rugged by their own government. Okay? Don't get rugged by your own government. Don't get rugged by the government printing infinite amounts of currencies, because they don't operate at a profit. Okay? Work, increase your money, park that money into a good store of value, such as Bitcoin, and then you'll be less stressed. You'll be less worried about finance over the long term for yourself, your family, and your future family. Okay, so I hope this message reaches you well. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, I want you guys to like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and follow my page. All right, jump in the Telegram chat if you want to get coached by me. Instagram, Chase Your Grace. TikTok, Chase Your Grace. I hope you guys have a good day. Thank you, and bless up.